Have you ever wondered about the people who work around you? Have you ever really taken the time to get to know them, learn their names, or even bothered to care? It's pretty funny. A lot of people answer no to all these questions. It's a wonder really how many people can work in a place and not know the people it is who work beside them. I understand that, especially when it's a huge place, like a shipping plant or some kind of factory. You really can't know everybody who works there. Realistically though, you should at least know the people that are there to protect you and look out for you. It's very interesting to note that people put a lot of blind trust in people, especially when it comes to security. As for myself, I try my best to get to know everyone around me. It's imperative that I do, because in my line of work, knowing people is vital. Now, as I'm standing guard here, outside this medical facility waiting for this nurse I'm supposed to escort, I can't help but think about how indifferent and rude people can be. It's a shame, really, how security and other members of the facility are often looked down upon by medical staff. The arrogance of some people is rather disheartening, and it boils my blood. Even now, standing in this frigid winter air, I think about how some nurses feel entitled and above all others. They tend to belittle people, patients, staff, visitors, doesn't matter who it is. They become so jaded to their surroundings and arrogant that they tend to think they run the show. More often than not, it takes the stern words of a few brave souls to shut them down, but honestly, it only lasts for a moment or two before they're riding back on that horse. Though, I really shouldn't generalize all the medical staff, nor should any generalization ever be used to describe a group of people. I apologize for the ramblings. This frigid air has gotten my thoughts rather scrambled. I may only be talking to myself at this point, but honestly, if I don't keep myself in line, who will? I think this is a good practice for people. It's kept me humble and fair for years now. Where was I? Oh yes, the rotten few nurses who think their asses are as sweet as candy tend to not realize that without the combined efforts of the entire workforce, the whole system would crumble. If you didn't have hard-working cleaning staff, then the hospital could shut down. Without the security, the place would fall into chaos. And without the techs and dietitians, there wouldn't be a hospital. The list could go on, but I see the young lady approaching me, and it's time to get into character. In order to effectively carry out this escort, I'd need to have a commanding presence and show a strong resolve. I should note that it's nearly 1 in the morning, and unfortunately, there has been a rise in people being attacked near the area. It was odd, though. Most nurses don't switch shifts until around 6 a.m., and yet here I was, standing here about to take her to her vehicle. I'm not complaining, though. She's very attractive. She has a curvy body, and let's just say her proportions were to my liking. Her hair is a deep, rich red, almost mahogany-like color. I'm always partial to redheads. We greet one another. I pull out my radio and announce that I would be beginning the escort. I receive the 10-4. We proceed to where her vehicle is located, and again I'm puzzled. She had parked back farther out than most nurses do, and in a really poorly lit area. I have to admit, at this time my suspicions are beginning to peak, but unfortunately, I had a weakness for pretty faces. I continued to lead the way, and we spoke a little bit to one another, exchanging tidbits about the weather's harsh conditions, and about how we wish we were home. After a few minutes, we neared her car. Then something dawned on me. Had I seen this girl before? She looked familiar, but I didn't have a name for her. I quickly scanned her to see if I could identify her from the name tag she was supposed to be displaying, but she didn't have one on her. How could I have been so stupid? I questioned her about it, and she gave me a panicked look. My hand was near my baton. She had been wearing a thick, sporty jacket. What she did next caught me by surprise. She had bitten her lip and began to unzip her jacket slowly. I admit, I was intrigued, but my hands were ready to take action if need be. She popped her jacket open in a flashing motion, exposing her badge, which had been clipped to the left side of her top. She laughed at me and shook her breasts. My heart was beating fast, and my only thoughts were that she was a playful thing. I thanked her for the proof of her ID. She gave me a flirtatious wink and said, "Any time." The nurse began to search her jacket for her car keys, and after a few seconds dug them out of what looked like a complex series of pockets. But it was at that moment that I had this eerie, sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I heard a loud rustling sound coming from a set of hedges near our right side. The nurse gasped and attempted to ask what it was, but I immediately cut her off, motioning her with my left hand to be silent. I pulled out my baton and mustered up whatever little courage I had and asked, "Who's out there?" The rustling stopped. My heart was beating in my chest. The sound of hissing started to come from one of the hedges. I had no idea what it was that I was about to face. In an instant, 2 balls of fur came jutting out from the edge. The nurse let out a small scream. I felt so foolish, and we both sighed in relief, for it had been just 2 tomcats in the midst of a territory dispute. The nurse and I looked at one another. We shook our heads and laughed. I walked back over to the driver's side of the car. The nurse had opened the door and had turned to get in. She gave me her goodbye, and it was at this moment that I knew I had to move. With the baton still in my hand, I struck the back of her head as hard as I could. It was a clean hit. She was out cold. Now, due to all the recent attacks in the area, I knew the police would be by soon to do their patrols. The scanner on my radio would notify me if they were near. But for now, it was time to get to work, so I grabbed the nurse's keys and unlocked her trunk. I moved her over and placed her inside. I removed the handcuffs from my duty belt, placed her hands behind her back, and proceeded to secure the silvery bracelets over her slender wrists. I pulled the duct tape from my cargo pocket of my BDUs and bound her legs together. I took a long piece of tape and placed it over her lovely lips. She was so beautiful laying in that spacious trunk. After a moment of admiring the young beauty, I closed the trunk firmly and proceeded to wipe down any blood that had splattered from the blow. Once I had sure the car was clean, I looked around for any evidence of my being here. The area looked good, and I got into the car. Just as I started the vehicle, my radio squealed. A unit had turned down the street I was on and was approaching me slowly. I took a deep breath. The officers pulled up next to me and lowered the window. "Evening," I said. The officer gave me a look. I knew they were analyzing me. It's what they did. "Evening," one of them replied. "How's it going tonight?" I asked. The officer on the passenger side gave me a smile. "Not much. How's it going with you?" he stated. "Oh, you know, same shit, different day," I laughed. The officer gave me a small laugh and nodded in agreement. The officer looked at me again. "You just getting off?" he asked. "Yeah, man. I've been here for almost 16 hours and I'm beat. How about you guys?" The officers laughed a little harder than I expected. "I wish. We still got a few hours to go. Anyways, everything's good here. Nothing out of the ordinary?" His facial expressions had a hint of eagerness to it, half expecting me to blurt out something. I shook my head. "Sorry, gentlemen, but it's been a slow night." The officers nodded and said their good nights, and gave me the "drive safely" line. It sounded too pre-recorded. The unit drove off. I began to pull out of the area, and my thoughts went back to my original questions. Do we ever take the time to get to know the people around us? Evidently, this young lady hadn't, because if she had, maybe she would have realized that my face never really belonged. It's with this I beg you with this question. Do you know the people around you?